So I just beat Kingdom Hearts yesterday. I've been playing the game over a long period of sessions, sometimes sequential, sometimes scattered, with my friend Ariel, HinkPink on YouTube, who is a big Kingdom Hearts fan and was letting me use their PS2 and copy the game. Because I started my playthrough some 3, maybe 4 years ago, I don't have the greatest recollection of the early parts, but the last parts of the game are, of course, very fresh in my mind. Given all that, I wanted to use my experience with the game as a springboard for some thoughts I had bubbling while playing it. Yoko Shimomura. This is going to be, I think, an unusual approach to the subject of Shimomura compared to the way she most often comes up in discussions around Kingdom Hearts. This also might come off as a weird thing to start the video with, but it's always been true that music matters a lot to me when I play games, so this was very much at the forefront of my mind during my playthrough. Because I'd never owned any Sony consoles after the first PlayStation, my only experience with Kingdom Hearts for years was trying Chain of Memories on a GBA emulator once or twice. I had a couple of problems. One being that I was young and didn't have the aptitude or attention span to keep up with an isometric deck-building platformer RPG, and two being that I had no context for what was going on and didn't understand any of it. As a result, I just never got into Kingdom Hearts the way a lot of other kids of my generation did. It might be for this reason that I never built up any affinity for Shimomura's work in the series, but there are definitely some other factors at play here. You might be aware that Yoko Shimomura was already an accomplished and prolific games composer before 2002's Kingdom Hearts. She'd been a part of Capcom's sound team from 1989 to 1993, and in that period she composed her breakout work with a handful of tracks by Isao Abe, the soundtrack to Street Fighter II, some of game's most recognizable music, and a soundtrack that will never die. She did other composition work for Capcom, some by herself, some in collaboration with other Capcom composers, and some where she was brought in for 1 or 2 tracks to help with the workload. But when she left Capcom for Squaresoft in 1993, she quickly became one of the company's go-to solo composers. Starting with 1994's Live Alive, a game practically meant for Shimomura's experience composing in different regional styles of music, and solidified with 1996's Super Mario RPG, Yoko Shimomura had demonstrated how good of a composer she was for the RPG genre. And that's where she wanted to be too. She was stationed in the arcade department at Capcom, which was separate from the console game developers, and she wasn't able to compose for the first Breath of Fire, though she did write one song for it. This is what led to her leaving for Squaresoft with the express purpose of composing for RPGs. Super Mario RPG was a huge turning point in Shimomura's career. Not just for what it represented, a rather monumental work with a lot of backing from both companies involved, massive amounts of press and phenomenal critical reception, but for what it was at the crossroads of. Before it lay her handful of collaborative soundtracks at Capcom and the years prior Front Mission, a joint work between her and soon-to-be Bahamut Lagoon composer Noriko Matsueda, and after it, Shimomura would go on to solo compose Parasite Eve, Radiant Historia, Legend of Mana and Heroes of Mana, every single Mario & Luigi game, and almost every Kingdom Hearts game. She still collaborated with other composers a lot on the games after her move to Squaresoft, especially after 2010. But she had this huge period of being one of the composers in video games in terms of doing a lot of different works and doing them as a solo composer. I'm laying all this out to give context to why I've always had a little disdain for Yoko Shimomura being labeled the Kingdom Hearts composer. Years ago, I would have been hot on the trigger for pointing people to Parasite Eve's music, Live Alive's music, Street Fighter II's music, and saying, look, you can do things that aren't just the Kingdom Hearts sound. This outlook on Kingdom Hearts' impact on Shimomura would get exacerbated for me as every subsequent Mario & Luigi game started sounding more and more like generic Shimomura work. It started to feel like everything she composed sounded Kingdom Heartsy, and that loss of individual personality in the works I knew from her made me disinterested in the music of Kingdom Hearts. I worry I might still feel that way with later games in the series, the way I still feel that way with the Mario & Luigi series, but with Kingdom Hearts 1, I can now say it's a shame that I felt that way at the time. It hasn't shot up to my top 10 soundtracks or anything, but some songs really resonated with me in my playthrough. Traverse Town, Hollow Bastion's battle theme, almost everything from the Destiny Islands and the End of the World, thanks to those two paralleling each other musically, and Dearly Beloved, all made a lasting impression on me that I don't think is going to fade anytime soon. I think a lot of the Disney World's music was weaker, either for being lesser or equal arrangements of classic Disney tunes I had mixed relationships with anyway, or for trying to fit the same niche as classic Disney tunes I had mixed relationships with anyway. Wow, that was a lot of scene setting and build-up for a pretty straightforward opinion, huh? Let's move on to something that hopefully requires less background, like, oh no. Sora and Riku. Just a quick warning, significant game spoilers are going to pop up in this section. I know Kingdom Hearts is almost 20 years old, but hey, I just beat it yesterday. People are always playing old games for the first time. If you don't want to hear about Kingdom Hearts 1 spoilers, go ahead and skip right to the next section, probably, yeah. As a kid with no relation to Kingdom Hearts, a teen with a neutral relationship to Kingdom Hearts, and a young adult with a self-formed negative relationship to Kingdom Hearts, I had a pretty low view of Soriku, for literally the same reasons I had a negative view of Narusasu, or... Actually, that's the only other major example I can think of, but it's still pretty illustrative. If a work I wasn't interested in garnered a mostly young girl fan base that latched onto a male-male ship and made it popular, I probably would have said I hated it if asked. As an aside, Fujoshi culture sucks and is not what this section's about. This is all years and years ago, though, before I went through a lot of self-introspection, developed some better media literacy, and grew out of a lot of internalized bigoted beliefs and reflexive reactions to things that never went challenged in my adolescent years. I also realized that I was trans and queer, so that may have impacted the way that I perceive stories and characters, maybe. In sitting down with Kingdom Hearts in an open mind, it's really, really easy to see why people would have put Sora and Riku above Sora and Kairi even this early in the series, well before every subsequent game piled on more and more Riku importance. It's a classic case of writers seeing the relationship between the main character and his love interest as a given, and putting less emotional substance and development into it than with the main character and his rival, who they have to justify. But who's gonna walk away from this game thinking Riku isn't framed as the most important relationship Sora has? No Palpu fruit, connected hearts, or ending CG set to simple and clean is going to make Kairi as impactful to the narrative of Kingdom Hearts as Riku's fights with Sora, Riku's gradual turn toward darkness while Sora rebels, Riku's stopping Sora's fall just before the Ansem boat fight, and Riku helping pull the door to Kingdom Hearts closed as Sora pushes it. All of this is, of course, sold by the frankly bafflingly good for 2002 performances by Haley Joel Osment and David Gallagher as Sora and Riku.
Quit while you can.
No, not without Kairi.
The darkness will destroy you.
You're wrong, Riku. The darkness may destroy my body, but it can't touch my heart. My heart will stay with my friends. It'll never die.
Really? Well, we'll just see about that.
Ah!
In fact, most of the voice work in this game is fantastic, with only a few non-notable examples. If anything, the major thing holding this game back presentationally is that the dev team couldn't devote more of the budget to thorough character animation for all the voice dialogue. Most scenes are fine, but stuff like parts of Sora and Kairi's exchange in the Hidden Waterway, and almost everything with the Beast in Hollow Bastion is hampered by the lack of detailed face animation when they're talking. The funny thing is, this animation flaw never affects any scenes with Riku to my memory. Please don't be mean to me in the comments if I'm wrong, it's been years since I played everything before Atlantica. The amount of attention that Riku gets presentationally helps to, again, frame him as an important character and important relationship for Sora. It's really no wonder people like them together. Alright, so that's music done, story done. Oh, I guess all that's left is the gameplay, right? I mean, those are the three components video games are constructed from, and all video games have them with no exceptions. This segue is stupid. The magic. I tend to have some apprehension to getting into action RPGs for the sole reason that turn-based RPGs are comfort games for me, and trying to step out of that realm into RPGs that are more active sounds an alarm in my brain like, oh no, I can't spend forever thinking about what I'm going to do and zone out and start looking at my phone and come back to make my move after 5 minutes. How am I ever going to dedicate 30 to 100 hours to this? but it's fine. It's fine. I like me a good Secret Urbana, and it turns out I like me a good Kingdom Hearts too. What's funny is that I really didn't gel with the combat in this game at first. Sure, maybe part of that is from playing specifically the original PS2 release without any of the controls conveniences I'd have to assume later ports added, but I would sooner cite the lack of depth early in the game as the cause. When you first start out in Kingdom Hearts, all you've got is your blade and probably some items. There's stuff you can do with that, but not much, and it feels very shallow. This is on top of the sound design for fighting the earliest Heartless you run into, making them sound like striking pillows with a fly swatter. It just didn't grab me at all, and I wrote it off as something I just had to put up with in order to experience more of the game. And I'd like to be able to say things clicked for me pretty soon after that, but that didn't happen until around Hollow Bastion, which is a really far point to the game to have a change of heart. Before then, fighting Heartless felt just like busy work, and fighting bosses just a war of attrition. But at some point in the final stretches, I had a breakthrough that affected my enjoyment for the rest of the game. The magic system in Kingdom Hearts is fun. Here's the deal. While I like RPGs in general, playing and beating Paper Mario at age 7 wrote something into my brain that made me like low numbers RPGs, where you have to manage and pay close attention to health and magic values. Games like that are pretty uncommon in my experience. Most RPGs either focus on bars for health and magic, or have high enough numbers that you basically treat them like bars, worrying only when they're low and not really thinking about the management of them otherwise. Kingdom Hearts is like that with its HP gauges, but it limits MP to a handful of segments that you restore with items or by dealing damage to enemies, the latter filling up a secondary, temporary MP bar that restores segments when it hits the right points in the MP gauge, but can also be spent as MP depending on how much you filled in. This kind of mechanic, where being active in one area of gameplay fills up a spent resource used for another area of gameplay, creates a mechanical push and pull that could be incredibly satisfying to find a rhythm in. Because you start off with 2 or 3 MP, and the most MP you can build to is 8 to 12, spells, and select other abilities, only cost like 1 to 3 MP to use. Instead of thinking about my MP in terms of, I have enough MP to cast something and I'm out of MP, time to refill, I ended up blocking the MP I had into what I could do with it specifically. 1 MP is a heal or a lightning or a fireball, 2 MP is a defense up or a time stop, or 2 heals, 2 lightnings, etc. 3 MP became the ideal spot to be in because I could throw out an arrow and cure back to back the moment I needed it. Anything above 3 MP was a luxury, because even with HP Rage helping me out, I basically never built above it before needing to use my MP immediately. And I'd only have more than 3 MP when I saved, loaded a save, or went through the arduous right analog stick menuing to try to use an ether or elixir on myself, which I almost never did. I'm really glad that I ended up falling in love with the MP management game, because if I didn't, that final boss rush probably would have been a lot rougher for me. Incidentally, I'm a little scared that this is indicative of me having some MMO healer class blood in me. It's a good thing I don't play MMOs. In conclusion... In conclusion? What, you listened all the way through this and expect it to end like a normal game review? I don't have any closing thoughts or anything, I just liked this game and wanted to get a few thoughts to stop bouncing around in my brain by releasing them into the wild, so now you have to think about them. That was my plan from the very beginning! You fools had no idea!